A racist white police officer crossed all boundaries of cruelty, brutally assaulting a 7-year-old black girl as she innocently played on the beach, all under the helpless gaze of her grandparents, both over 70. But from the crowd, a stranger stepped forward. With unyielding courage, he confronted the abuse of power, stood up for justice, and brought forth a beacon of hope in a moment of darkness. This is a story that will touch your heart. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching this video from. Don't forget to like and share if this story moves you. And now, let's begin. The sun cast its golden rays over the endless stretch of beach, where the sound of waves lapping the shore mingled with the laughter of children. Maya, a 7-year-old black girl, ran joyfully along the sand, her tiny feet leaving faint, scattered prints. She was engrossed in collecting seashells, lining them up carefully, her wide eyes sparkling with pure delight. Not far away, Maya's grandparents, Walter and Eleanor, sat on a bench under a large beach umbrella. Walter, his white hair glistening in the sunlight, slowly flipped through the morning paper, occasionally glancing up to ensure his granddaughter was still within sight. Eleanor, with her gentle and kind demeanor, kept her eyes on Maya, fanning herself lightly to ward off the heat. "Sweet Maya, don't wander too far," Eleanor called out, her voice tinged with affectionate concern. "Yes, Grandma!" Maya turned back and waved, her smile revealing a gap-toothed grin. The beach wasn't crowded that day, mostly filled with families enjoying their vacation. Adults chatted beneath colorful umbrellas, while children splashed and played in the cool waters. Maya was completely absorbed in the joyful atmosphere, running and skipping tirelessly. But amidst the tranquility, an unfamiliar figure appeared. In the distance, a man in a police uniform was walking slowly along the beach. He was tall, his angular face set in a cold expression, and his sharp eyes scanned the people as if searching for something. His heavy steps seemed at odds with the peacefulness of the morning. His gaze stopped on Maya. Walter lowered his newspaper, a vague sense of unease washing over him. Eleanor leaned forward, a tension rising within her as she noticed the man moving toward their granddaughter. No one could have predicted what would happen next. In an instant, the serene atmosphere became heavy, like a storm quietly gathering on the horizon. Maya remained blissfully unaware, crouching down to collect another glittering seashell under the sunlight. Her small hands carefully cradled the treasures of the sea, arranging them neatly into a pink plastic bucket. Suddenly, a deep, gruff voice rang out behind her, startling Maya into dropping the last shell. "What are you doing here?" Maya turned around to face the icy glare of a police officer. His eyes held no warmth, only suspicion and irritation. I'm just collecting seashells," Maya stammered, her small voice trembling under the shadow of the towering man. "Not here," the officer interrupted sharply, his tone cutting. "Kids like you shouldn't be playing here. This isn't the place for you." Maya glanced around in confusion. There were no signs indicating restrictions, and the area looked no different from the rest of the beach. Tears welled up in her eyes as the officer suddenly leaned down and grabbed her tiny arm. "Come on, I'll take you where you belong." "No, let go of me," Maya screamed, struggling to pull free, but her small hands were no match for his iron grip. Not far away, Walter noticed something amiss. He folded his newspaper hurriedly and stood up, but his aged legs made him slow. Eleanor followed close behind, her face a mask of panic. "Stop that right now! That's our granddaughter!" Walter shouted, but the officer didn't loosen his hold. "This girl isn't allowed in this area." The officer barked, his voice booming as if to drown out any reasoning. Eleanor reached Maya first, desperately trying to touch her, but the officer quickly blocked her path. "Step back, ma'am. This is police business. You don't want to get involved." "Maya hasn't done anything wrong. Let her go." Eleanor screamed, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and helplessness as she watched Maya sob uncontrollably. Maya was still blissfully bent over, picking up another glittering seashell under the sunlight, completely unaware of the shadow approaching her. Her small hands cradled the treasures of the sea, carefully placing them in her pink plastic bucket. Suddenly, a deep, gruff voice rang out from behind, startling Maya and causing her to drop the seashell. "What are you doing here?" Maya turned around, coming face to face with the cold, stern expression of a police officer. His eyes held no warmth, only suspicion and displeasure. I'm just collecting seashells, Maya murmured softly, her voice trembling under the towering figure looming over her. Not here, the officer cut in sharply, his tone icy. Kids like you shouldn't be playing here. This isn't the place for you. Maya looked around, confused. The spot where she stood had no signs prohibiting access and was no different from the rest of the beach. Tears welled up in her eyes as the officer suddenly bent down and grabbed her small arm. Come on, I'll take you where you belong. No! Let go of me! Maya screamed, struggling with all her might, but her tiny hands were no match for his firm, unyielding grip. Not far away, Walter noticed something was wrong. He hastily folded his newspaper and stood up, but his age made his steps sluggish. Eleanor followed quickly, her face pale with alarm. Stop that this instant! That's our granddaughter! Walter shouted, but the officer did not release his grip. This girl isn't allowed in this area, the officer barked, his voice booming as though trying to drown out reason. Eleanor reached Maya first, desperately trying to touch her, but the officer stepped in front of her, blocking her way. Back off, ma'am. This is police business. You don't want to get involved. Maya hasn't done anything wrong. Let her go, Eleanor cried, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and helplessness as she watched Maya sob uncontrollably. The crowd began to gather, with a few onlookers stopping out of curiosity. But no one dared to step closer, intimidated by the uniform and the gun holstered at the officer's side. Amid the chaos, a voice suddenly cut through the tension like a sharp blade. Let the girl go. All eyes turned toward the source of the voice. Liam Carter, a man with sun-kissed skin and hair tousled by the sea breeze, was walking toward them. He wore a white button-up shirt with rolled-up sleeves and shorts, exuding a calm demeanor, but his eyes burned with fierce determination. The officer snapped his head around, scowling at Liam. Stay out of this. It doesn't concern you. This concerns all of us, Liam replied, his voice steady but sharp as a knife. He took another step forward, closing the distance. You're terrifying this little girl. That's not what a police officer is supposed to do. The officer narrowed his eyes, tightening his grip on Maya's arm as if to assert his authority. I told you to back off. And I'm telling you to let the girl go, Liam said, emphasizing each word. The entire beach fell silent. Maya, still crying, stretched out her hands toward her grandparents. Walter reached out, but the officer's bulky frame blocked him. Liam glanced at the crowd, noticing phones being raised to record the scene. You know something? Liam said, his voice low but razor sharp. A lot of people are watching you right now, and I bet they'd love to know why a police officer is manhandling a 7-year-old girl. For what reason? The officer froze for a moment, his eyes flashing with fury. But Liam didn't stop. He turned to address the crowd, his voice rising with conviction. Does anyone here think this is right? A child playing on the beach being treated like a criminal? Record this moment, because justice thrives in the light. The murmurs among the crowd grew louder, and the air around them buzzed with indignation, and the atmosphere on the beach had frozen solid. All eyes were fixed on Officer Grady, who still gripped Maya's tiny arm tightly. The little girl sobbed, each hiccuping gasp breaking the peaceful air that was now suffocated by tension. Walter and Eleanor stood helplessly nearby, the despair etched on their faces betraying their inability to protect their granddaughter. Liam Carter, calm in appearance but with eyes blazing, stood amidst the crowd like a shield. I'll say it one last time, he repeated, his voice deep and thunderous. Let the girl go. Grady, now facing not just Liam but also the growing gaze of onlookers, squinted in defiance. I don't need advice from a stranger, he snarled, his eyes darting to the crowd with disdain. This is police business. All of you should step back. Liam took another step forward, now only an arm's length from Grady. The tension rose with every second, like a taut bowstring on the verge of snapping. Police officers have no right to make a child cry and tremble in fear like this, Liam said, his voice firm but calm. You want to enforce the law? Do it the right way. This is abuse of power. Grady's face flushed red, his anger boiling over like a volcano ready to erupt. He abruptly let go of Maya, but only to deliver a venomous retort. And who do you think you are? Some beach hero? Walter immediately pulled Maya into his arms, her small body still trembling with fear. Eleanor wrapped her arms tightly around her granddaughter, tears streaming down her cheeks. Not a hero, Liam replied, his voice now cold as ice. but I know the difference between right and wrong. Grady scoffed, his hands clenched tightly at his sides as though restraining himself. Yet his expression betrayed the anger and confusion brewing beneath as he felt the weight of the crowd's judgment. Phones were raised, their cameras flashing as they captured the scene. You think a video will scare me? Grady sneered, a crooked smirk crossing his face. I'm just doing my job. Don't expect anything different. Doing your job, Liam emphasized each word, his icy gaze locking onto Grady. You grabbed a 7-year-old child, threw her into overwhelming fear, and called that your job? The crowd murmured, a few people whispering words of protest. A woman standing nearby shook her head and spoke clearly. There's no justification for that behavior. Grady turned to the crowd, his face tight with irritation. The girl shouldn't have been in this area. I was just following the rules. Liam locked eyes with him. Then show me the rule that allows you to use violence on a child, or admit that you have no authority here. Grady clenched his teeth, his gaze wavering as he realized his position was crumbling. Enough, he snapped, his voice harsh. Don't tell me how to do my job. I'm not telling you, Liam replied, his tone unwavering. But your job isn't to instill fear. It's to protect. Another voice rang out from the crowd. Has anyone reported this yet? A police officer can't act like this. Grady turned back, glaring at the crowd, now aware that the tide was turning against him. Phones were raised high, every accusing eye on him. He took a step back, then another, trying to regain control. But Liam didn't let him retreat. If you won't take responsibility, your actions will speak for themselves, Liam said, pointing to the phones recording the scene. Grady fell silent, his jaw clenched so tightly it made the muscles in his face stand out. He pulled out the radio on his belt and murmured something into it. We've got everything we need, someone in the crowd said loudly, their voice firm. Local police will be here soon. Grady took a deep breath and cast a final glare at Liam and the Walters. I won't forget this, but the threat only brought a cold smile to Liam's face. Neither will I. Grady turned and walked away, his steps heavy under the weight of whispers and condemning stares. Maya remained in Eleanor's arms, her small shoulders trembling with residual fear. You're safe now, Maya, Eleanor whispered, her tears falling as she smoothed down Maya's curly hair. You're safe. Liam knelt down to Maya's eye level, his eyes softening. Are you okay, Maya? I'm so sorry you had to go through that. Maya looked up at him, her wide eyes still filled with lingering fear, but now touched with a sense of safety. Thank you, sir, she whispered. Walter placed a hand on Liam's shoulder, his voice choked with emotion. Young man, if it weren't for you, I don't know what would have happened. Liam nodded, his expression filled with understanding. I didn't do anything extraordinary, sir. I just stood up when I saw something wrong. In the distance, the wail of police sirens pierced the air, a promise that justice was on its way. The sound of police sirens grew louder, breaking the suffocating tension on the beach. Grady, though he had already stepped away from the crowd, turned back with a glare of irritation and a flicker of panic in his eyes. Liam stood tall, positioning himself firmly between the Walters and the officer's threatening gaze. We will make sure no one in this family is harmed any further, Liam said, his voice steady and resolute, like a direct challenge to Grady. 2 police cars pulled up near the beach, and a female officer stepped out, flanked by 2 colleagues. She was tall, her hair neatly tied back, and her sharp eyes scanned the scene with authority. The crowd quickly parted, all attention shifting to the new arrivals. What's going on here? The female officer asked, her voice both commanding and calm. Before anyone could answer, Grady hurried forward, attempting to regain control of the situation. It's nothing serious, he said, shooting a sharp glance at Liam. Just a misunderstanding. I was trying to prevent a child from damaging this area. Damaging? Walter's voice trembled with anger as he stepped forward. My 7-year-old granddaughter was just playing and collecting seashells. He grabbed her and scared her so much she burst into tears. This isn't a misunderstanding. It's abuse of power. The female officer raised an eyebrow, her gaze moving from Walter to Grady. Do you have any evidence of this? She asked, her tone calm but firm. A voice from the crowd called out, We do. A woman stepped forward, holding up her phone. We recorded everything. This officer grabbed the girl and threatened her family. A chorus of agreement rose from the crowd as numerous phones were raised, each accompanied by declarations of captured footage. The female officer signaled to one of her colleagues to collect the videos. Grady took a step back, his face flushing red as he sensed the tide of opposition growing against him. "How can any of you be so sure my actions were wrong?" he growled, his voice laced with desperation as he tried to mask his unease. "This is my job, and I don't need any of you telling me how to do it." Liam stepped forward, his gaze locked firmly on Grady. "No one needs to tell you how to do your job, but your job is to protect, not to make a child your target." He pointed toward Maya, still trembling in her grandmother's arms. "You didn't just terrify her, you took away this family's sense of basic safety. That's why we're all here." The female officer slowly approached Grady, her expression icy. "You've exceeded your authority, and this will now be investigated," she said, her voice steady and unyielding. "Hand over your badge and report to the station immediately." Grady froze. "I was just doing my job," he shouted, though his voice now lacked the conviction it once carried. "I didn't do anything wrong." "We'll determine that," the female officer replied, her tone unwavering. "But right now you're tarnishing the honor of the police force." Grady had no choice. With a face contorted in suppressed rage, he unpinned his badge and handed over his radio, placing them into his colleague's hands. His glare swept over the crowd, his fury palpable, but all he met were faces filled with indignation and contempt. As Grady turned and walked away, Liam turned back to Walter and Eleanor, his expression softening. "Everything's going to be all right," he said, gently placing a reassuring hand on Walter's shoulder. "We have evidence and witnesses. Justice will be served." Walter, still holding Maya close, looked at Liam with profound gratitude. "You didn't just protect my granddaughter," he said, his thick with emotion. "You've restored my faith that there's still goodness in this world. Thank you." Liam nodded, his eyes now on Maya. "Maya, you are a very brave little girl. Don't ever let anyone make you feel like you don't belong here, okay?" Maya looked at Liam, her tear-filled eyes beginning to sparkle with newfound trust. "I'll remember, sir," she whispered. From a distance, the female officer gestured toward Liam. "We'll need your statement," she said, her tone respectful. "Of course," Liam replied, with a nod. Walter and Eleanor stood by Maya's side, watching as Liam walked away with the officers. Under the setting sun, what had happened would remain a haunting memory, but Liam's courage had become a shield for their family. Far off, the waves continued to crash against the shore, as if working to wash away the traces of the storm that had passed. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting the beach in hues of golden amber, Maya remained curled up in her grandmother's arms. Though the ordeal had ended, the haunting image of Officer Grady's menacing glare and his harsh grip still lingered in her mind. Walter knelt beside his granddaughter, gently stroking her soft curls. "You're safe now, Maya," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "No one can hurt you anymore." Beside him, Eleanor placed a reassuring hand on Maya's shoulder, though her eyes stayed fixed on Liam, who stood a few steps away, answering questions from the female officer. Around them, beachgoers continued to murmur, their gazes often landing on Liam with admiration. A few even approached him to express their gratitude. "We need more people like you," said a middle-aged woman, her eyes red and glassy. "You did something we all only wish we had the courage to do. Thank you, truly." Liam nodded slightly, a faint smile playing on his lips, but his eyes remained vigilant. He didn't feel entirely at ease in the spotlight of attention, yet he understood this moment wasn't about him. He knew that, in many ways, this story was far from over. In another corner, the female officer reviewed the videos recorded by onlookers. The scene of Grady gripping Maya's arm, ignoring the protests of her grandparents and the terror in the child's eyes, played clearly on the screens. The murmurs of outrage from the crowd grew louder, like embers of a fire beginning to blaze. "This is completely unacceptable," the officer said, her voice sharp as she spoke to her colleague. "We need to escalate this to the higher-ups immediately." Grady, now standing at a distance, kept casting glances toward Liam and the Walters. Stripped of his badge, his eyes burned with anger and resentment. The whispers around him cut through his pride like knives, making his jaw tighten and his fists clench at his sides. Liam returned to the Walters, crouching down to meet Maya's gaze. The hardness in his expression softened, and his eyes filled with compassion as he looked into the little girl's puffy, red-rimmed eyes. Maya, you were so brave, he said, his voice warm and steady. Things like this should never happen, but you faced it so well. I promise I won't let anyone scare you like that again. Maya looked up at Liam, her innocent eyes trying to absorb his words. You, you're like a superhero from the movies, she murmured, her voice still trembling slightly. Liam chuckled softly, shaking his head. No, I'm just someone who couldn't stand by when something wrong was happening. Walter placed a hand on Liam's shoulder, his eyes glistening with tears. Young man, we owe you so much. If it weren't for you. His voice broke, unable to finish the sentence. Liam gently shook his head. I just did what needed to be done, sir. Done, sir. But justice is still a long road ahead. We have to stand together. The incident quickly went viral. Videos recorded by witnesses on the beach were shared widely across social media, accompanied by captions filled with outrage. A police officer assaults a 7-year-old black girl. Local news outlets swiftly picked up the story, with images of Maya crying in her grandmother's arms and Liam standing resolutely against Grady becoming the focal point of attention. That evening, in their small room at the resort, Walter and Eleanor's phone rang incessantly with calls from friends and family who had seen the video. Some expressed their sympathy, while others couldn't hide their outrage. Maya, though comforted, refused to leave her bed. She curled up under the covers, her wide eyes staring silently at the ceiling. Eleanor sat beside her granddaughter, gently stroking her soft hair. Maya, everything will be okay, she whispered, though she couldn't stop the tears streaming down her face. Out in the hallway, Liam leaned against the railing, his eyes fixed on the distant ocean waves glimmering under the moonlight. The sea breeze tousled his hair, but his expression remained somber. He knew that today was only the beginning of a much larger battle. When Eleanor stepped outside, she placed a hand on Liam's shoulder. I don't know how to thank you enough, but will any of this really change? These terrible things, can we really do anything to stop them? Liam turned to her, his gaze steady and resolute. I don't know what the future holds, Mrs. Eleanor, but if we do nothing, then it's guaranteed nothing will change. The important thing is to never stay silent in the face of injustice. The next morning, the soft light of dawn stretched across the beach as if to soothe the wounds of the previous day. But for the Walters, the storm was far from over. Maya woke with puffy eyes, her face showing signs of exhaustion. She no longer seemed eager to go out and collect seashells as she had every other morning. Instead, she sat curled up in a chair by the window, silently watching the waves rise and fall. Eleanor brought her a warm glass of milk, setting it on the table beside her. My dear, we could take a walk if you'd like, she gently suggested. Maya shook her head, clutching a pillow tightly to her chest. I don't want to go outside. What if that man comes back? Maya's words pierced Eleanor's heart like a dagger. She sat down beside her granddaughter, wrapping her arms around the little girl. No one will hurt you again, Maya. We'll protect you, no matter what it takes. Walter stepped into the room, holding his phone. He glanced at his wife and granddaughter for a moment before turning to Liam, who was sitting at the small dining table, quietly sipping his coffee. Liam, last night's events have blown up more than I expected, Walter said, his voice heavy. Every news outlet is covering the story. The local police just called. They've opened a formal investigation into Grady. Liam set his mug down, his sharp gaze steady but calm. That's the first step, but we can't stop there. You both need to be ready to speak the truth because if we stay silent, this will all be forgotten. Walter nodded slowly, though concern was etched into his face. I'm not afraid to speak up, but Maya, I'm worried she might not be strong enough to face all the attention. Liam looked over at Maya, his expression softening. He walked over and crouched down to her eye level. Maya, I know you're scared, and that's completely normal, but I want you to know that you're not just brave. You're someone very special. What happened to you was wrong, and because of you, we have to do everything we can to make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. Maya looked up, her shimmering eyes beginning to regain a sense of strength. But what if they don't believe me? Liam smiled, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. We have evidence, and there are people who witnessed everything. Most importantly, I believe you. and that's powerful enough to change everything. Meanwhile, at the local police station, the atmosphere was tense. Grady entered the interrogation room with a scowl, while the investigative team busied themselves with gathering testimonies and reviewing evidence. Videos recorded by witnesses had been submitted, clearly documenting every action Grady took on the beach. Do you realize that you exceeded the head investigator asked, their sharp eyes fixed on Grady. I didn't do anything wrong. Grady snapped back, his voice defiant. That girl didn't belong in that area. I was just following protocol. What protocol allows you to grab a child and cause both physical and emotional harm? The investigator's tone was icy, cutting off any room for rebuttal. We're not just investigating your actions, we're also reviewing whether your license to practice should be revoked. You should prepare yourself. Grady fell silent, his hands clenching into fists, but he had no words left to defend himself. That afternoon, Walter, Eleanor, and Maya, accompanied by Liam, met with a lawyer at an office near the resort. The lawyer, a middle-aged woman with a resolute expression and piercing eyes, listened intently as they recounted their story. The evidence is clear, she said, nodding as she took notes. This isn't just about Grady. This is about holding the system accountable. This case has the potential to become a major lawsuit. We're not looking for money, Walter interjected. All we want is safety for my granddaughter and justice for every child out there. And that's exactly what we'll fight for, the lawyer replied, her eyes filled with determination. We're not just seeking justice for Maya, we're setting a precedent to ensure this never happens again. Maya glanced around the table, her eyes no longer clouded with the same fear as before. Though her small heart still bore scars, the light of hope had begun to shine through. In the days that followed, the once peaceful beach became the center of attention for the entire town. Videos of the incident between Maya and Grady spread like wildfire, drawing the focus not only of the local community, but also of human rights organizations. Media crews swarmed the area, setting up cameras at every angle to capture the latest updates. Maya, once a cheerful and carefree child, had become more withdrawn. Whenever someone raised a camera in her direction, she would quickly hide behind her grandmother. Eleanor and Walter did their best to shield Maya from the whirlwind of attention, but the situation seemed to spiral beyond their control. At Liam's home, the young man sat at a cluttered desk surrounded by stacks of papers and an open laptop. Though he had received an outpouring of praise from the community for his courageous actions, he knew the story was far from over. Liam read through countless messages from human rights organizations, invitations for interviews from major news outlets, and even anonymous threats. Just then, his phone rang. "Liam here," he answered, his voice tired but steady. "It's Walter," came the voice from the other end. "Could you come over?" "Maya, she doesn't seem to be doing well." Liam arrived at the resort in less than 15 minutes. Maya was sitting on a rocking chair on the balcony, her gaze fixed on the distant waves. Eleanor sat beside her, gently stroking her granddaughter's hair, while Walter stood silently by the doorway, his face etched with worry. "Maya," Liam called softly, lowering himself to sit in front of her. "Can I sit with you for a bit?" Maya nodded, her eyes still glued to the crashing waves. "You know," Liam began, his voice warm and steady, "I grew up near the ocean. I used to think the sea was the safest place in the world, but sometimes the waves can be really rough. They can scare us. But do you know something?" Maya shook her head, her eyes now curious. "The rough waves will pass," Liam continued, a gentle smile forming on his lips, "and when they do, the sea becomes calm again, just like you. What happened was very scary, but we'll get through it together, and you'll come out stronger than ever." Maya was silent for a long moment before turning to Liam. "Do you think I can be as strong as you?" "You're already much stronger than I am," Liam replied, pride shining in his eyes, "because you faced something that even many adults couldn't handle. And you're not alone. We're all standing with you." Eleanor squeezed Maya's hand, offering a tearful smile to Liam. His words had not only comforted Maya but also soothed the quiet pain that Eleanor herself had been carrying. Meanwhile, Grady faced a personal crisis. His actions were not only condemned by the public, but also became a burden on the local police force. Colleagues distanced themselves, his superiors suspended him from duty, and the media relentlessly surrounded him. One evening, under the dim glow of streetlights reflecting off his weary face, Grady sat alone in his empty apartment. The scenes from the beach, the sound of Maya's cries, and the determined look in Liam's eyes played over and over in his mind like an unending reel. For the first time in years, Grady began to question himself. Had he truly been wrong? The following morning, Liam accompanied Walter and Eleanor to the police station to meet with the investigative team. They provided detailed testimonies and handed over all the evidence gathered by witnesses. "We will ensure this matter is dealt with seriously," the lead officer assured them, her tone firm. "Thank you for having the courage to come forward, not just for Maya, but for others who could have been victims." Walter glanced at Maya, his eyes brimming with pride. "We're doing this for my granddaughter and for children like her. No one should have to endure this." The story continued to spread. But this time it carried not just outrage, but also hope. Human rights organizations and the local community began organizing discussions and workshops focused on police reform. Maya, despite her young age, became a symbol of courage and the pursuit of justice. Liam, Walter, and Eleanor stood by Maya's side every step of the way. They knew this wasn't just a fight for today, but a legacy for the future. A future where children like Maya could grow up without fear. As the official investigation into Grady's actions was launched, Maya's story became a symbol more powerful than ever. From local newspaper articles to national television programs, images of Maya and Liam's brave stand appeared everywhere. Yet, amidst all the noise, the Walters worked hard to maintain a peaceful life for Maya. One afternoon, Liam visited the Walters with a plan in mind. He carried a small camera and a notebook. Maya opened the door, her eyes still showing a hint of hesitation, but her face lit up when she recognized Liam. "Hi, Maya," Liam said, crouching down to her level. "I have an idea today. Would you like to help me do something special?" "What kind of special?" Maya tilted her head, curiosity sparking in her eyes. "I want you to tell your story," Liam replied, holding up the small camera. "You don't have to speak in front of the camera. You can write it down or draw it instead, so others can understand that this should never happen to anyone." Standing behind Maya, Eleanor and Walter exchanged glances, a mix of surprise and pride in their eyes. Eleanor gently placed a hand on Maya's shoulder. "Maya, you can do this if you want to, but only if you're ready." Maya was silent for a moment, then looked up at Liam. "Can I draw instead? I like drawing better." "Of course," Liam said, his smile full of relief. "That would be the perfect way for people to see the story from your perspective." That evening, in the small room at the resort, Maya sat at a desk with a stack of blank paper and a box of colored pencils. She began to draw a beach with towering waves, a tiny girl standing in front of the looming figure of a man in uniform, and in the distance, another figure running to protect her. Each stroke of Maya's pencil seemed to ease the fears lingering in her heart. She didn't speak much, but her eyes sparkled with determination as she completed the drawing. Eleanor sat beside her, gently placing a hand on her granddaughter's shoulder, sensing Maya's slow yet steady healing. When Liam returned, Maya proudly handed him the drawing. "This is my story," she said, "but I don't want people to see only fear. I want them to see courage, too." Liam studied the drawing, his expression softening. "You've done an amazing job, Maya. You're not just brave, you're inspiring so many others." Meanwhile, at the police station, the pressure on Grady continued to mount. An internal hearing was convened with lawyers, police leadership, and representatives from the local community in attendance. Walter and Eleanor were also present, with Maya sitting quietly by their side, clutching her favorite colored pencil tightly. When Grady entered the room, his gaze briefly flickered to Maya, but the defiance from before was gone. His shoulders slumped as though burdened by the weight of his actions. Videos from the beach were played alongside testimonies from witnesses, painting an indisputable picture. This officer didn't just exceed his authority, Walter's lawyer stated firmly. He inflicted severe psychological trauma on an innocent child. This behavior is utterly unacceptable. Grady bowed his head, saying nothing. When it was Walter's turn to speak, he stood, his voice trembling but resolute. "I'm not someone who seeks confrontation," he said. "But when I saw my granddaughter treated like that, I couldn't stay silent. Maya is just a child, and no one, no matter who they are, has the right to strip away her safety and joy. The room fell into a heavy silence. Maya looked at her grandfather, her wide eyes shining with pride. The result of the hearing was Grady's dismissal, along with the launch of a broader investigation into abuse of power within the local police force. The news spread quickly, and Maya's story became a rallying cry for the community, inspiring calls for meaningful police reform. That evening, as the family gathered around a simple dinner, Maya spoke up unexpectedly. "I want to go back to the beach," she said, her voice small but resolute. "I don't want to be afraid anymore." Walter and Eleanor exchanged glances before turning to Liam, who nodded encouragingly. "You don't have to do that right now," Liam said gently. "But if and when you're ready, I'll go with you." Maya smiled, a real smile, the first in days. She realized that no matter how hard it might be, she would never face it alone. The sunlight bathed the beach in a golden glow, making the water shimmer like a field of gemstones. But for Maya, it was a monumental challenge. She stood at the edge of the sand, gripping her grandmother's hand tightly, her gaze fixed on the distant waves. "It's okay, my dear," Eleanor whispered, her eyes filled with tenderness. "We'll take just a few steps, and it'll be fine." Liam stood nearby, not too close to create pressure, but near enough for Maya to know he was there, ready to support her. "There's no rush," he said softly, his voice as gentle as the ocean breeze. "Whenever you feel ready, we'll do it together." Walter stood behind them, quietly watching. He said nothing, but the way his hands clenched his straw hat spoke volumes. Worry, pride, and deep love for his granddaughter. Maya took a deep breath and stepped forward, her small foot sinking slightly into the soft sand. She felt the sun's warmth spread across her toes. "I remember now," Maya murmured almost to herself. "This is how I stepped before." Eleanor smiled gently, squeezing Maya's hand a little tighter. "That's right, Maya, but this time, no one can scare you anymore." Liam stepped closer, kneeling to meet her at eye level. "Maya, do you remember? Big waves can seem scary, but they always fade, and will always stand strong." Maya looked at Liam, determination shining in her eyes. She released her grandmother's hand and took another step forward. The ocean breeze tousled her curly hair, and for the first time in days, a small smile spread across her face. The people around the beach began to take notice. A few recognized the little girl from the story that had spread across social media. They whispered to one another but kept their distance. They simply stood quietly, watching with eyes full of support. "She's so brave," a woman murmured. "Yes," the man beside her agreed. "Not everyone has the courage to return to a place where they were hurt." Maya didn't hear their whispers, but she felt a sense of calm returning to her heart. She bent down to pick up a glittering seashell from the sand, studying it for a moment before smiling softly. "Do you see, Maya?" Eleanor said, her voice trembling with emotion. "You did it." Meanwhile, Liam stood quietly in the distance, watching. He knew this wasn't just a small step for Maya, but a significant one for everyone who had followed her story. The fight for justice was far from over, but this moment was a testament to strength and resilience. Liam pulled out his phone and recorded a short video of Maya playing on the beach. He had no intention of sharing it online. This moment was for Maya, for her family, a personal reminder that no matter how dark the world might seem, light could always find its way back. That evening at the resort, the family gathered together. Walter was reading the newspaper, Eleanor was preparing a cup of tea, and Maya sat on a rocking chair, holding the seashell she had collected earlier. Liam sat across from her, the notebook filled with Maya's drawings resting in his hands. "You did so well today, Maya," Liam said, his voice filled with pride. "You've shown not just strength, but also that nothing can defeat a courageous heart." "I think you're right," Maya replied, her small voice steady with determination. "I'm not scared anymore. I want people to know they don't have to be afraid." Walter looked up from his newspaper, his eyes brimming with pride. "My granddaughter is truly remarkable," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're not just a brave little girl, Maya. You're an inspiration." Eleanor nodded, placing a comforting hand on Maya's shoulder. "We'll always be with you, Maya. Every step you take, we'll take with you." Maya's journey, though not yet complete, had entered a new chapter. Her story from that day on the beach was no longer just about pain and injustice. It had become a story of healing, courage, and hope. Liam knew that with every small step Maya took, the world moved closer to justice and humanity. Outside, the waves still rolled against the shore, but this time they were no longer something to fear. This is not just a story about a brave little girl or a man who stood up for what's right. It's a reminder that in a world filled with injustice, even the smallest actions have the power to create change. Always believe in justice, kindness, and the healing strength of humanity. If this story has touched your heart, share it to spread the light of hope and faith. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you again in the next story.